Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kathy Schultz. I am the Water Education Specialist with the California Department of Water Resources, and I would like to welcome you to Delta Invaders. The mission of the California Department of Water Resources is to sustainably manage the water resources of California in cooperation with other agencies to benefit the state's people and protect, restore, and enhance the natural and human environments. For the past 4 weeks, we've been learning about some of the animals that have made their homes in one of these environments for thousands of years, the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta. Today, we're going to be learning about some of the newcomers to the Delta and the impact that they are having on it. For those who are not familiar with it, the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta is a large river delta and estuary that covers 500,000 acres and is located about right between the San Francisco Bay to the west and then Sacramento, Stockton, and Lodi to the east. The Delta is one of California's most important natural resources. It provides water to over 27 million Californians and hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland, and it's also home to hundreds, if not thousands, of species of wildlife. In the past 4 weeks, we've learned it's home to many threatened and endangered species like salmon, sturgeon, salamanders, snakes. It is also a critical stop along the Pacific Flyway. And the Delta also serves as an entry point into California. In the 1840s, when gold miners arrived in San Francisco, they then traveled upriver on paddle boats to Sacramento before heading out into the gold fields. And today's cargo ships still travel between Stockton and West Sacramento to points throughout the world. In part because of this, but for other reasons as well, the Delta is one of the most highly invaded ecosystems in the world. And Gina Darren is with us today. Gina is an environmental scientist with DWR, and she'll be telling you about some of the invasive species in the Delta, the problems that they are causing, and what we can do to help. Before I turn things over to Gina, I just want to go through a few logistics. If you are joining us through Zoom, your cameras are turned off and your microphones are muted, but we really do want to hear from you. So there's a chat box. You can go to the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on the little speech bubble and ask Gina any questions that you may have about invasive species. There's also, if you'd like closed captions, there's a CC button also on the bottom of your screen, and so you can turn on the captions as well. And now, without any further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Gina.
Great, thanks, Kathy. All right. So, going here. All right. So again, thank you all. Thank you, Kathy, for inviting me, and thank you, Josh, for the tech support. Really appreciate that. So I'm Gina Darren. I'm an environmental scientist, and I work on restoration. So restoration is when you transform a place kind of back to a more natural state for the fish and wildlife that live there. So for example, this picture that is on your screen is an aerial picture of the Dutch Slough Restoration Site. I'm kind of circling it right here in the Delta. It's near the city of Oakley. That's what's off in the distance there. And this site is over 1,000 acres. And keep in mind, 1 acre is about the size of a football field. And this site costs millions of dollars to restore. So restoration sites are really vulnerable to invasion while the native plants are taking time getting growing. So there's lots of habitat here to be opened up to potential invaders. And remember, habitat is a place where plants and animals live. Now, when an ecosystem is more diverse in its plant and animal species, it is stronger, healthier, and more productive. So invasive species can really tip that balance when a dominant invasive species takes over the place. So while Delta invaders are typically not from outer space, they do come from other places, and they tend to act like bullies when they arrive. So this handsome devil next to me, who I'll show him off a little bit later, is a nutria, also pictured here. This is a really big rodent. This nutria is going to join us for the presentation, and please do type your questions into the chat. I'm really looking forward to hearing them. Do you recognize this plant? Anyone? That is yellow star thistle. Pretty obvious, it's yellow, it's got a lot of spines. So this is an example of an invasive species you might be familiar with in California. Invasive species typically are not native to the ecosystem, but now remember, most of our food plants are also not native to where we grow them here, but those plants don't cause a problem out in nature. So just because it's not from here does not make it invasive. To be invasive, they also spread very easily, and they have the potential to cause harm to our economy, like agriculture, farming, our environment, like our water supply, and to human health. They can actually cause sickness. So for example, yellow star thistle is native to Europe, the Mediterranean region. It has infested approximately 15 million acres in California, and it covers rangelands, so there's no food for the livestock. It's highly toxic to horses. The spines are very pokey, and it uses a ton of water. So for these reasons, yellow star thistle is an invasive species. But I want to talk to you more about delta invaders. So can you think of a species that has these three characteristics that might be invasive? If you watched the previous Water Wednesday chats, you would have heard about invasive non-native fish from Nicole, clams and mussels from Rosemary, birds from Danica, herps from Veronica. So today I'm going to show you some examples of invasive plants and an invasive rodent. All right, but so what? Why do we care about invasive species? Well, we care because they impact what we value. So for example, nutria here is a large rodent. It's native to South America. It lives in wetlands. It was discovered in California in 2017. This picture is from the California Invasive Species Action Week art contest winner. And I think it really sums up nicely why we care. We care because there's less food for other animals. Because for example, nutria have a voracious appetite. They eat 25% of their body weight every day. So a 20-pound nutria can eat 5 pounds a day. They destroy wetlands because they're very destructive feeders. So while they eat 5 pounds, they waste 10 times more than that in the vegetation that falls off. So lots and lots of destruction. They're also causing safety hazards because they burrow. And these are big rodents. They make big burrows and they can damage our levees around our rivers. So why does DWR care about invasive species? We care because invasive species can impact our water supply, our water quality, how good our water is, how we can deliver water to folks in California, and the healthy delta environment. We want to see that environment healthy. So you might be wondering, well, where are they from? How did they get here, these invasive species? So to orient you, this is a map of North and South America. There's a picture of water hyacinth, which is an invasive weed. It is in the Delta anyway, it is here pictured in the Amazon where it grew up with a bunch of bugs and things that eat it, and it's kept in balance because when the Amazon River floods, the water hyacinth goes up on the banks and dries out and it doesn't become a problem. And then it has to arrive. So somehow it arrived in the Delta where it found a very good climate for it to live. So that, you know, and then it survived. So the climate was great, it survived, and then it reproduced. So because it didn't have any more predators to worry about or flooding to worry about, it was able to thrive and put all of its energy into multiplying and not so much in defense. So here's another look at invasive water hyacinth. It's a floating plant in California. It floats on rivers. This is a picture of water hyacinth in the Yola bypass floating on a Tule canal. There's a DWR environmental scientist, hip deep in water hyacinth. It creates these thick mats that can outcompete other plants for resources like light. It blocks boats. For example, in the Stockton Deepwater Ship Channel, boats can't navigate at night when there's water hyacinth. So all the barges have to come in during the day. And that's really rough on the economy when that needs to happen. So DWR, we support our partners at the Division of Boating Waterways to help control this plant in the Delta. But I want you to take a look at this up close shot. Do you notice anything interesting, possibly on the leaves? That's right. Something is nibbling on those leaves. So our good friends at the U.S. Department of Agriculture are working hard to find bugs that eat this plant, but won't eat anything else. And these are called host-specific biological control agents. That's really cool, but that is another show. Moving on, here's another weed. Now, while hyacinth has been in the Delta for a long time, alligator weed is a relatively new arrival. Alligator weed is really quite a bully because not only can it float on top of the water, it also can grow under the water, it can grow out of the water, and it can even grow up on land. You can tell an alligator weed, take a look at this picture, that has what we call opposite leaves. This is a little bit more rare in the plant world than alternate leaves, where you have them coming like this. So if you see a plant out in the Delta with opposite leaves, it's kind of growing on top of the water like this, and it has this white pom-pom flower, definitely report that, and I'll tell you where later. So DWR is, scientists are working on mapping this plant and keeping track of it so we can hopefully start working on controlling it. All right. Another invasive plant in the Delta, Phragmites. Now, you might be looking at this picture and think, wow, that's a big dark mud patch in the middle. Actually, this is a restoration site in the Sassoon Marsh, and this is what we call a tidal mudflat. That's a really good thing. It provides a lot of habitat for birds and fish. And what you're seeing on the outside kind of coming in is the Phragmites. This is a shot from the air, and it's really starting to take about this picture. It's kind of very square, mostly square looking dark patches here. So we are, my team, working on an experiment to see if we can control invasive Phragmites in a restoration site without hurting any of the other plants and animals that live there. So we're in our first year of this study. So far, so good. More to come on that. So this is a flyover video of that same site. You can see this is the Blacklock site, and we're going to show you a little bit more, get you a sense of how big this plant is. This plant is super tall. It can be 12 feet tall, and a patch can be 10 feet wide. It looks a little bit brownish right now because this was shot in the fall when the plant was going to sleep, or what we call senescing for the winter. But oh, it's bright green now, that's for sure. So what we're concerned about is that Phragmites can create this dense jungle of vegetation that can crowd out the other species, like the native marsh birds, and then is not ideal habitat for our endangered salt marsh harvest mouse. All right, and lastly, for today, this is an invasive rodent called nutria. This critter is originally from South America. It has wreaked havoc on wetlands in Louisiana, the Chesapeake Bay, and it was discovered in California in 2017. So we've talked about their voracious appetites, their destructive burrowing behavior. They also, spread, they reproduce like rodents. Our friends at the California Department of Fish and Wildlife are working really hard with a bunch of other agencies, including ours, to manage this invasive rodent. So, and now I want to show you some features of this guy to look for. So this is a nutria, and one thing I want to point out for you to look to identify nutria is these white whiskers. This is unique. Combination of characters I'm going to show you nutria apart from, like, say, a beaver or a muskrat, or even an otter and a mink that can get confused with it. The white whiskers for sure. There's this light ears. Four big that shows up in their tracks. They also have webbed feet, except for the one toe. So you can see a round rat-like tail. So now I'm going to show you a video and see if you can pick out the nutria characteristics. And what identifying characteristics can you see in this video that might make you think this could be a nutria? Did you see the white whiskers? Did you see the light patch around the ears? Did you see the rat-like tail? That's right. So this is definitely a nutria that was caught on a game camera outside of Stockton. They like to come out of the water while they're eating, although they do tend to travel mostly through the water. All right, so I bet you're wondering what you can do to help, and I really appreciate that. So you can stay informed. You're doing that right now, so great job. Also, the California Invasive Species Action Week is coming up next week, and there are activities posted on their website that I'll share with you, like virtual events on learning to identify invasive species. So that's a good way to get informed. Keep an eye out, get to know those outdoor spaces that you enjoy, and notice if you see something new or out of place or acting badly, and let your local naturalist know, or your teacher. Get to know the invasive species of concern in your area and know which agencies to report them to. And it's best to give a specific location and ideally a photo with your report. So for example, I'll give you websites for the Division of Boating and Waterways. You can tell them about invasive weeds in the Delta. For terrestrial weeds, you'll want to talk to your county agricultural department. And for invasive animals, definitely let the California Department of Fish and Wildlife know. Last thing you can do, prevent the spread of invasive species. It's much better to prevent them than to control them after they're here. So ways to do this are to clean, drain, dry your boats when you're moving from waterway to waterway. Do not release your pets. As much as you might think that's the right thing to do, it really isn't. Definitely give your pets back to the pet store or give them to a friend who will keep them inside if you're done with your pet. Plant non-invasive plants. There's a site here, PlantRight, that can teach you which plants are good to plant for your garden. And then if you're really a smartphone savvy, you can download this app from CalFlora where you can actually map weeds while you're out hiking, and then other botanists like me can find out about them. And with that, I am happy to hear your questions.
Great, thanks, Gina. So I have a couple of questions for you. If people are out, like say somebody's out boating in the Delta and they come across a big patch of the water hyacinth, should they pull it? Should they remove it? Or what's the best thing to do when you run across these?
Yeah, sounds like folks want to know what they can do to help. Can they actually get involved in removing the invasive species from the landscape? So I would discourage that unless you are absolutely sure what it is that you are pulling. The species, its distribution in the area, but really best to leave that to the agencies who are working on that issue. Definitely do report it. It's better to report it and then maybe the agency already knew versus don't say anything and then it starts to spread unchecked.
So you shared some invasive species with us today. Is there like one specific invasive species of concern in California, like the biggest worry?
Oh, wow. The biggest worry, invader, would be a personal choice. It depends, again, going back to it, depends on what you value. If you are an avid biker, maybe the worst invader is puncturine, because it really can puncture bike tires when you run over it. If you like horses, maybe yellow star thistle is your worst invader. For the Department of Water Resources, we're concerned about a bunch of them that affect the water quality. So it really depends on what you are most concerned about.
The nutria, are they found anywhere else in the United States?
They are. So while they are originally from South America, where they're kept in check by caimans and ocelots and
hey, your audio cut out there for a second, Gina. Do you mind repeating that?
Sure. So while nutria are from South America, they have been spreading around the world. And so we do have populations, a big population in Louisiana and the Southeast. There is a population in Texas, and there is a population in Oregon. So we are keeping an eye on those as well, but we want to definitely keep them out of California.
Do we know how many nutria there are in the Delta?
We do not know. We are definitely on the lookout for the Department of Fish and Wildlife Nutria website, which I know we're on the last slide at the end here, to kind of keep track of where we're finding them. That's probably that's the best place to go to see the spread of the population.
Okay, so we don't know yet, but we're keeping track with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. That's where to check them out. Are there other species that can be confused with nutria?
Absolutely, yeah. Nutria look a whole lot like our native muskrat. They can look like a muskrat. Sometimes, if you don't see the tail, you can mistake a beaver nutria, and then even otter and mink can sometimes look like nutria. So again, if folks are really interested in the difference, there's a good identification that you can download from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's nutria webpage.
Hey, Gina, I'm not sure what's going on with our audio today, but you cut out again on that last part.
Oh, well, that's there.
Don't move. You're right. You're in the perfect place.
That is live television for you folks.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Department of Fish and Wildlife has a nutria identification guide that you can use to tell apart from the other native.
Okay. So they look like muskrats. They can look like beavers. How are some ways you can tell a nutria from, say, a beaver?
Well, the tail is definitely a good indicator. Beavers are also larger. Beavers do not have the white whiskers or the kind of golden ring around the ear like nutria do. So that's another way to tell them apart.
Okay, so the golden ring around the ear, the white whiskers, and then the tail's really different too, isn't it?
Absolutely. While the beaver have a big flap-like tail, the nutria have a rounded rat-like tail.
So it's kind of like a cross between a beaver and a rat.
The nutria?
Yeah.
Yeah. Beaver can have these big orange teeth too. So that's not an indicator.
So, we talked about these invasive species that they come from other parts of the world and they come to California where they are, they're not from here, they spread easily and they cause harm, correct?
Correct.
That's what makes them invasive. Are there species from California that are invasive in other parts of the world?
There are, definitely. So just how when maybe a species comes from another Mediterranean climate like Australia or South America, the Mediterranean, South Africa, and comes here, we also share our species with those Mediterranean climates. So one example that I know about is our iconic California poppy. The California poppy is actually invasive in the Canary Islands and also in Chile in South America in that Mediterranean climate area. And the poppies grow bigger than they do here. And they can also completely take over a plant community and crowd out other native species where they're found in other parts of the world. So yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. As poppies, they're so popular and beautiful here. It's hard to imagine them being invasive in other parts of the world. Is there anything else that you want people to know about invasive species?
Definitely a lot to know. One of the reasons I got involved in invasive species management is because and that means that there's something that, thanks Josh, that there's something that we can do to help manage the situation. So not all invasive species are human caused, but a lot of them are, so we can fix it. And that's what I like about working on invasive species.
So there's a question about how many habitats you know. Are you, I guess, primarily familiar with the Delta, or have you worked in other places on invasive species?
Oh, I have worked in other places. I got my undergraduate bachelor's degree in Florida, another very highly invaded area. You might be familiar with the Burmese pythons of the Everglades. Is a popular one. No, I actually got started with invasive mussels. The Asian green mussel recently invaded Tampa Bay when I went to school there, and it was clogging the pipes for the power plant intakes. And so my professor was called in to help figure out what's going on with this new species here in Tampa Bay. And I was lucky enough to mentor under her, and she taught me about invasive species. And I carried that knowledge here and got my master's degree from UC Davis in invasive species.
Do we have any problems with mussels like that in our water intakes in California?
The Asian green mussel is a marine mussel, so not those, but we definitely are concerned about potentially the quagga mussels and the zebra mussels. Those are a freshwater mussel that the zebra mussels have completely changed the ecosystem in the Great Lakes, and the quagga mussel is very similar, and we're starting to see quagga mussels showing up in California. So our folks in the operations and maintenance division of DWR in our aquatic nuisance species program are on it. They're definitely watching the waterways in California to look and track these mussels.
And so that's part of the reason that you talked about with the boats, with the, what was it, the drain?
Clean, drain, dry.
Clean, drain, dry. There you
Absolutely.
go.
Absolutely. Keep mussels from spreading around.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Gina. And I just want to remind people that if you're interested in learning more about invasive species and what you can do to help them from spreading, we do have some additional resources. As Gina said, we do work with other departments in California, including the Department of Fish and Wildlife. They have a website on their nutria and invasive species program. The California Invasive Plant Council, if you are interested in going out and learning how to identify and remove plants, they can do some training for that, as well as the Department of Boating and Waterways, which is part of California State Parks. They can also teach you how to identify aquatic weeds in the Delta. And like Gina said, next week is California Invasive Species Action Week, and DWR and the Department of Fish and Wildlife will both be doing a lot of outreach and helping you learn more about invasive species and what you can do to help reduce their spread. And of course, you can always visit our website, water.ca.gov, to learn more about the Delta and what DWR does. I want to thank everybody from home who joined us today. We are wrapping up our Delta animals series of Water Wednesdays, but we will be starting up a new series next week on our summer water sources. You may, if you've lived in California your whole life, you know that it's completely normal that we get very little rain between April and October. Sometimes no rain at all, sometimes the occasional storm like we've had recently. And it's not like that in other parts of the country, like Florida, right, Gina, where you grew up, or you did your undergraduate work. It rains year round. But here in California, we get hardly any rain in the summer. It's what makes us that Mediterranean climate that Gina talked about. But we all need water in the summer. We need to drink water. We like our swimming pools, and we have lots and lots of crops that grow during the summer. So the next 3 weeks, we're going to be looking at how we get our water during the summer, since it's not falling from the sky anymore. I hope that you will continue to join us. Again, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Gina. Thank you for bringing along your nutria. Have a safe week, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.